head idolized and the tail forgotten. There has to be a better way of being able to surface relevant content that's not super popular. Because basically what's been happening over the last little while, and search engines and social media are to blame for all of this, is that when content has a lot of money behind it, whether it's relevant or not, when it has a lot of money behind it, the search engines and social media tend to focus on that kind of content. Now, you all know the differences between head content and tail content, right? So head content is things like very expensive or highly funded media. Things like Disney, things like Marvel, things like, I don't know, Barbie, stuff like that. So very, very highly funded media. So there's huge amounts of money behind that media or that media network, right? And those things are super popular, but because not just because they've got a lot of money behind them, but because they've been around for a while or they have a huge following, right? And then there's the tail, and the tail content is the stuff, and where this came from is a graph of content and how many people actually go to see the content. So there's a popularity graph. So if you think of the popularity graph is like really high, and then as you get further out, you get smaller and smaller. It's less and less popular. I'm not saying it's less relevant. I'm saying it's less and less popular as you move out, and it's kind of like the tail of content. And the tail of content is super long tail of content, which is less popular. Remember, the scale is not relevance. The scale is popularity. The scale is popularity. Now, I'll give you an example of a couple of different things. So, for example, something like, I don't know, NPR, This American Life, or Marvel, like I was saying, a Marvel movie, would be considered head content because it's highly produced by a bunch of people and a lot of money's thrown into it, and they create this super high-end production, right? And at the other end of the scale, so let's say there's a Marvel podcast produced by Disney. That would be a piece of head content. Now, a Marvel podcast produced by some guy in his basement in Topeka and who publishes maybe a in-depth review of, I don't know, the various Iron Man suits that are out there. Let's say the guy's he's totally into Iron Man and he loves all the different Iron Man suits. So he puts out every week a podcast on Iron Man suits. Like every day, it's like, oh, this is the Mark IV, or this is the Mark V, or this is the Mark VI, and here's the record. So he does this as a labor of love. Puts out this thing on Iron Man suits. Now that would be what I consider tail content, because there's probably only a very small number of people who would typically listen to that. And the problem is that the person who's listening to the Marvel podcast from Disney is not going to know anything about this podcast from Topeka with the guy with the Iron Man suits, because there's no way to connect these two things together. Our search engines and our social media do a terrible job of connecting the head to the tail. And the reason why is that they make a hell of a lot of money off the head and they make very little money off the tail. Even though I would not be surprised if a lot of the content on these little tail podcasts, now I'm not saying specifically, unless you are a Iron Man geek, the content in those tail podcasts or that tail content, tail YouTube channels, tail blogs, tail podcasts, some of that stuff is super interesting. Super interesting. But because it's not popular, right? It doesn't have the huge numbers of audiences, then a lot of people will never see it because they're always going for the popular thing. Now, like I said, social media and search engines are to blame for this because they don't surface the relevant stuff because they figure if it's popular, then it must be good. It's kind of like what Google's original PageRank algorithm was. If a lot of people link to this page, then it must be good, right? But that, again, looks at popularity. It doesn't look at relevance. Popularity and relevance are two completely different things. You can have an incredibly interesting site deep down the tail that never gets seen by anyone because of the way everything is designed. So in my perfect world, and I've talked about this before about asking for the least popular. You go into a restaurant and you say, you know how everybody says, what's the most popular item on the menu? And you've never been to this restaurant before. What's the most popular item on the menu? That's an easy question. People ask that all the time, right? Have you ever asked what's the least popular? What does nobody get? And I wouldn't be surprised if you got a really delicious meal out of this least popular item. And it's the same with content. All of this content is probably really good. Sure, some of it might not be good, but some of it's really good. And we need to figure out some way of surfacing that really good content way out, created by these individual contributors, these individual creators, not the ones who are looking for fame and fortune and clamoring for success. No, the ones who really create really good content. We need to surface those individuals. We need to surface that content and get it in front of the people who would be interested. So maybe there's a way of doing it. Maybe there's a search engine we need to create which expressly links the head and the tail content. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, because today social media and search engines do not allow this tail content to be shown, or they allow it to be shown, but it's very difficult to find. So we need to get back to the days when it was much easier to find this tail content, to unearth this really cool stuff that nobody else is seeing. And I don't know if we have to do a search engine to do it, or I don't know if we need some revolution at Google or Facebook or X or somewhere to be able to get it out there, because there's so much good stuff out there if we could just get to it. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.